So we're up here at my good friend Jeff's farm, and he's offered up a tree. Jeff's uses firewood to heat his home with, and so this is going to be someday going through his stove. And it's a specimen that's ready to be taken down. It's a good example tree for us to use today to show how to fell a tree. Now, one of the things that's important when you head into the woods is, what's around you. Are there any impediments to this tree falling? Are there other trees beside it? You're going to see that there's a little one there beside it, and you tend to want to clear the area around your tree to make sure you're going to be able to back away safely as the tree begins to fall. And so that's the first step here, is we're just going to clean the area and get ready. So when you're falling a tree, you want to be aware of which way the tree wants to fall. And so part of that can be the lean of the tree itself, or there can be more branches on one side, so there's more weight on that side. And what you're trying to do is use that natural tendency of the way the tree wants to fall. You're going to be using that as you fall the tree. So there are three major elements when you're making your cuts for falling a tree. Now, on the side that you're going to be falling the tree, you would make your undercut, and that's a wedge that you're going to be taking out. In the middle of the tree then is your hinge, and this is very important. This is what's going to control which way the tree falls. It's going to make sure that the tree's always going to be doing what you're expecting it to do. And then the final element is the back cut. This is the coming in from the rear and where you're releasing the tree and allowing it to fall. Now, for the undercut itself, there are many different ways to do the undercut. In the West, where I'm from, traditionally they would make the cut on the lower side, and they call that a Humboldt. But here in the East, often what you see is a wedge that's taken out using an angle up off the floor cut. And it doesn't matter which style you use, both of them are efficient. For the actual undercut itself, it's not so necessary what the angle is. The steeper you make your angle, the longer your cut's going to be. You're cutting more wood, but it won't really affect how the tree falls. There can be different reasons to make a narrower or a wider one, but in general, you could just say a 30-degree, 45-degree wedge for your undercut is certainly sufficient. When you're making your back cut, the back cut, sometimes you'll see people will make a cut at an angle, and we call that a farmer's cut. And that's not to disparage my friend Jeff, but this is a cut that's improperly done. When you're cutting the back cut, what you're looking to do is maintain when the tree is going to fall, and that's dependent on how much holding wood you have, this hinge area in the middle of the tree. If you're cutting at an angle, it's very difficult to control that hinge, and it's also very hard to meet that at an exact point where you know your tree is going to begin to fall. Because when you're coming in with your back cut, you're taking more and more wood away, and that hinge will begin to bend and let the tree fall. But depending on how much lean you have, how much weight there is on the tree, that amount of hinge can vary. And it can even vary with the species. Some wood is harder and stronger, and so you need less hinge, and so those things are variable. So you're going to see, I'm going to lay out the cuts for you here, and we'll see them one at a time. So we've determined which way we think the tree wants to fall, and the other thing you should be then looking for is, are there any impediments to it falling? If there are other trees in the way, then often a tree can be left hanging, and so that can be a very dangerous situation. Also, trees can be kicking back off the stump. There can be effects if they hit other trees, there can be problems. So you want to be falling the tree into an area where you know it can clearly fall to the ground. So for your undercut, what you're looking to do is remove a wedge as I described, and you want the cut to be about 1/3 of the way through the tree. I talked about the hinge, so what we're trying to do is we're trying to leave an area of hinge wood that the tree will rotate on. And so we want that to be through the heart of the tree where the best wood is, where it's got the most width, so it gives it the most stability. And so what we've done now is made a cut about 1/3 of the way in, and now I'll make the upper portion of the undercut. So you can see here we've got the undercut removed. Again, we're 30 or 45 degree angle. You're trying to make those two cuts meet, and that is an important part of making your undercut, is you're trying to make those two cuts meet. You don't want one to go further than the other. There are elements to that, but that's what you're trying to do. Once again, we're level on the floor cut of the width of that undercut, and the two cuts meet. Now the other thing is, of course, how do you line that up with your cut? Or excuse me, how do you line that up with where you want the tree to fall? And you'll notice on every chainsaw that there are markings. Typically there are markings on the case, and you line up those or sight those and use those as a sight to where the tree is going to fall. And so we can see here we've got sight lines on the saw. We're heading right this way, exactly where we want this tree to fall. All right, so we've got the undercut ready. Now we're preparing to make our back cut. Now the back cut, you want to be just slightly higher than the apex of your undercut. You don't want to be below. Being level with the apex is fine, but it's easier just to come in a little bit higher. Now you want to be making your, as I explained before, you want to be making your back cut level, and you want to be trying to come in level and meeting that. Now, what you want to be doing is leaving a strip of wood, and it depends on how much lean you've got and what species you've got, but you want to be leaving a strip of holding wood. We call it holding wood. And this is the hinge, and so what's going to happen as you make your back cut, the tree will begin to fall, and it's going to be rotating on that hinge wood. And so it's that hinge wood then that maintains the control of where the tree is going to be falling. It prevents it from going from one side or the other side away from the direction that you desire it to fall, prevents it from coming off the stump and putting you in peril, all those things. So it's very important to be maintaining hinge wood. Now, here we are, we're ready to make our back cut. You saw in the initial shots that I was clearing the area around the tree, and this is important. You don't want to be staying at the base of a tree as it's falling. There's lots of things to be watching out for. There can be hangers that get dislodged as the tree begins to fall. It may strike other things. They can come back at you. So you want to be leaving the area at a 45-degree angle to the fall. So not directly behind the tree, but either one side or the other side of the tree at a 45-degree angle. And you want to be prepared before, as you making your back cut, you got to know this is the area that I'm going to retreat to, where I'm safe. Now as you're beginning to cut, one of the easy things to do is be aligning your saw. You know we want to be in a little bit higher than the base of your undercut, so you can kind of be lining your saw up and then moving back and beginning your cut in that fashion. So you can see here I've got lots of hinge wood left. The tree's not quite ready to fall, but you can see that I'm coming in. I'm going to be approaching almost a little bit low, but kind of right on for as far as reaching where the apex of the undercut is. And what you want to do then is you're going to continue to cut more and more of that hinge wood until the tree wants to fall. Now what can happen is the tree doesn't want to fall. The temptation is to keep cutting, and eventually you're going to lose control. You're going to lose that hinge. So that's one thing you need to be aware of, is that you can't cut right through that hinge. If the tree doesn't want to go, you're going to have to find some other means to help you. So we're going to do a little bit of a stump post-mortem. Of course, we've got our undercut, 35 to 45 degrees. Here we can see the elements of the cut, the back cut coming in and meeting at the apex of your undercut. We see this hinge wood that's been left to allow the tree to rotate around. Now, if I was to critique this cut, what would I say? Well, I wasn't quite flat on the bottom of my undercut, so that wasn't the best. Coming in, we're nice and stable here, but of course we're coming in flat here, a little hinge down there, so we're a little bit higher on this side of the hinge. Not a big deal. But we see we've got a nice hinge here. We were hung up a little bit in some of the upper branches, but I trimmed a little bit more off the hinge and away it went. So once again, just the simple basics are you're making an undercut. You're making that with the idea of this is the direction that I want the tree to fall. We've got then the hinge wood that's been left to make sure you maintain control and direction of the fall of the tree. And then you've got your back cut. And we always want to be making that back cut level so we are able to maintain good control in terms of determining the width of our hinge. So in some of the footage you did see me using a wedge, and that can be a part of if the tree doesn't have a very strong lean, or in this case we had some branches that were hung up. We can help the tree in terms of assisting it in its direction of fall. Now as far as what height should I be making my falling cut? Now in this case, I'm just going to be using this for firewood. So I went about 16 inches up from the flare at the bottom, because I know he'll come along here and he'll trim this off nice and flush, and that'll be a good piece of firewood for him. In other circumstances, you may want to make your cut lower. Perhaps you've got a fine piece of wood you're going to be using for lumber or something like that, and so you might want to make it lower. But the problem is that often you're into the root flare, and so the tree is larger. There can be other elements that you don't want to be cutting in. So it's often good just to be making your cut at a comfortable height. That's the safest for you. So of course there are dangers working in the woods and in falling trees. I remember once I was with my son and he asked me, how do you know speaking in tongues is real? And I said, well, in my life, in my experience, it's kind of been in times of danger or problems that I would just begin to speak in tongues. And really the most, the biggest memory for me with that is when I was 18, I was working in the woods with my dad, and there was this faller, and I remember I woke up in the morning in the bunkhouse, and he was in the room right across from me. And it rains every day in the north coast of British Columbia, and he just, he didn't want to go to work. His name was Red, big, strapping New Zealander, probably in his 50s, just about time to give it up. Anyways, that day, Red was in an accident, and so I was on the crew beside, and my dad sent me down to give them a hand. And Red was falling a tree, and there was a hanger in there, and as the tree went over, the hanger came down and hit him in the back and drove him down a short hill, and he was laying in a creek. And so when I came there, they just asked me to stay with him. We couldn't move him. We were waiting for the helicopter to come, and so I was just there, and I remember just praying in tongues as I waited there with Red in his time of suffering, and nothing we could do for him. So, Red, he ended up being a paraplegic. He was very seriously injured. But I remember the first aid man asking me, "What are you doing?" And he was a Christian, and I said I was praying in tongues, and it was just coming out of me. And so be safe when you're out there. There's a saying that as long as there are tests in schools, there'll be prayer in schools. And I guess we could say the same for in the woods. As long as we're out there trying to fall trees, there'll be prayer in the woods. So good St. Joseph, pray for us in this year of St. Joseph.